Hi, this is Ben Tafoya, and it's Saturday, May 2nd at 5 p.m., and it's another episode of 5 o'clock macro. We've been talking over these last few days about the state of the economy, at least the statistics that we have available to us based on economic reporting on the first quarter in the United States, in Europe, and in China. There are some other key statistics that we'll be looking at over the next week or so. But the bottom line is not a surprise that because of this crisis and the cessation of large parts of economic activity, GDP is crashing across the globe. So we've seen, if we use our formula here that we've been discussing for GDP, we see across the board declines in consumption, decline in investment, decline in exports, decline in imports. So what I want to do across our next couple of discussions is to talk a bit about what is to be done. Given the information we have and our reasonable extrapolation out, that during the second quarter, which is the quarter that we're in the midst of now, April, May, and June, in the United States and in Europe, we'll see probably a decline of about 20% in GDP compared to the previous quarter, and that begs for some kind of action to help support the economy. There's a lot going on, but there's a lot more that should and could happen. So tonight I'll spend some time doing a technical analysis of GDP and sort of the typical tools that we have to boost it, and I'll talk a bit about why that's not necessarily going to work this time because of the special nature of this particular economic crisis. And then in a future session, talk a bit about what work should we be doing from the perspective of equity to address the human toll of this crisis, the vast economic dislocation that's taking place at no fault of any of the folks who are falling victim to our current spate of increasing unemployment and lowered incomes. So first off, we've talked about the fact that there are declines in consumption. We understand this because in U.S. and most of Europe, there have been huge restrictions imposed on various kinds of business activity, particularly face-to-face services, and that has led to a steep drop in C, which will continue as we look at the numbers for the second quarter. And typically, in a typical recession, a decline in consumption is addressed through fiscal policy. And fiscal policy are the actions that the government would take, particularly our federal government, to reduce taxes or increase spending, anything that would inject more money into the economy. And typically, the sort of most favored kind of action would be those that boost disposable income. Disposable income is income after tax. So the three broad categories of income are consumption, savings, and taxes. So if you reduce taxes, you are theoretically increasing disposable income. Now, some portion of income goes to savings, some goes to consumption. We'll talk about that in a minute. But in 2008, 2009, during that crisis, the government went to cut taxes, particularly cut income tax rates, and to boost, in order to boost paychecks, And also, we cut payroll taxes. So there was a reduction for a couple of years in Social Security taxes. This helps boost this disposable income. And the government took other kinds of actions to help it with that as well. There were subsidies for COBRA, which is the program that governs how you transition from your employer-sponsored health care to a typically third party that allows you to keep the same coverage as before. It's not great because it's typically very expensive, and in the ARRA actions from 2009, there were subsidies for COBRA, just as there were special tax provisions related to higher education to help folks who wanted to transition back to be a student because their employment situation was non-existent or cut back. So we talk here about the idea that we want to increase disposable income in order to help plug some of that gap in GDP. But we also note that money leaks out from that process because people save. So one of the structural problems that we had in 2008, 2009 was the incentive that people had to save because of indebtedness levels. So the government put in place several kinds of programs to help encourage people to spend money that they were getting. So one of the sort of more famous programs, for those who are around, remember the Cash for Clunkers program, where if you had a car that was of a certain age and certain condition, you could trade that in and get an additional government subsidy above and beyond what you might have been able to get through the trade-in process with your dealer or an outright sale to another party. And we saw the success of that program in moving forward purchases that would probably have otherwise taken place at a later date, but they came forward to help speed up some level of economic activity. So the program did generate car purchases, and it was designed to do that because there was a particular problem with overcapacity worldwide for automobile manufacturing during this period of time. So this is a program designed to address those issues. There were also other programs like the programs that subsidized weatherization of homes, which was a decent idea given the large-scale unemployment that had occurred in the construction industry. It was good for a couple of reasons. So it helps incentivize people to spend money, in this case, to make an investment in their home to lower their costs. And in doing that, the hope was that some skilled tradespeople would actually get some jobs out of this process that would, again, also sort of help maintain incomes in the face of declining consumption. So the other way that we address declining consumption in a recession is typically we extend unemployment benefits. So when we work, we all pay a certain amount of money as foregone wages into an unemployment insurance program. Typically, the base program is 26 weeks, and then it gets extended during times of recession. So for the last crisis, it got extended out as far as 99 weeks. And in this crisis now, there is an extension period of 13 weeks, I believe, as well as some other things that we'll talk about later that we're doing to help boost unemployment benefits. The idea, again, is that as we boost income, then we will get a percentage of that money that is spent and not saved. And sort of critical to this is a concept in fiscal policy we talk about, which is the fiscal multiplier. And what we mean by multiplier is that given a drop in demand and a maintenance of productive capacity, so basically if people had money to spend in an area, people would make stuff to meet that demand. And by injecting money into the economy, the government is providing income to people. If that income is then spent, it will recirculate through the economy. So again, we're back to that idea of the circular flow. And there's a way that we can measure the fiscal multiplier, which is based on what we refer to as the marginal propensity to consume. Given an extra dollar of income, how much of that will go to consumption versus savings? The more of it that goes to consumption, the higher the multiplier winds up being, and the better the overall impact is on the economy. And in the last crisis, we saw a clear path that way because the crisis came during a period of time when there was tremendous productive capacity in the economy that was being underutilized because of this crisis that began in housing and the financialization of housing and that drug down GDP. So we were able to inject some money into the economy. It wasn't enough, but we injected some money into the economy. That money reverberated around because of the circular flow between households and firms and government, and that helped us then, boost the economic fortunes of the economy at the time. The concern that we have sitting here today in early May of 2020 is whether some of these fundamental assumptions hold here, because we are in the midst of seeing a contraction of productive capacity in our economy, particularly that related to services. So restaurants are closed, retail stores are closing, the face-to-face service organizations are closing, and we're talking about permanent closures here, not just sort of the temporary closures because of the enforced social distancing to respond to the virus. There are structural challenges that the service industry faces now. It may involve hotels, it may involve film theaters, concert venues, sort of all this capacity that we have that absorbs income that is spent, much of it as our leisure time spending, discretionary spending that we have, but some of it may be sort of related to business spending on travel, that kind of thing, airlines shutting down. These are all structural concerns about our capability of having the economy respond to sort of the influx of liquidity that the Federal Reserve is putting in, as well as the measures that are being taken in order to try to boost other types of economic activity. When we come back from a short break, we'll go through some of the rest of these issues related to GDP in the time of the COVID-19 crisis.